Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
All right, we got a couple of good stories queued up today. So I wanted to start off with Notepad++. So CISO has been warning about this. And basically what was discovered and kind of released just recently is the infrastructure that was delivering updates for Notepad++ had been compromised for 6 months by a suspected Chinese state attacker, and they used their control to deliver backdoored versions of the app to selected targets. And so after they did all the forensics, they discovered, like back in June of 2025, there was an infrastructure level compromise that allowed malicious actors to intercept and redirect that update traffic that was destined for Notepad++. There's fairly high confidence that the attribution is to the Chinese government, and they selectively redirected these targeted users to malicious update servers where they received these backdoored updates, and Notepad++ didn't actually regain control of their infrastructure until December. And what was really unique is the attackers used their access to install a never before seen payload that has been dubbed Chrysalis, and Rapid7 actually did a really good write-up of it. So I'll put a link to the Rapid7 breakdown. It's pretty technical. We don't have time to dive through all of it, but from the high level updates of what this payload looks like is it's extremely sophisticated, and it's capable of multiple different types of attacks, like full remote command execution, file theft and upload, interactive shell access, persistence via Windows services and registries, and then stealthy communication over HTTPS, mimicking legitimate traffic.
And one for the whole family.
Yeah, one for everything here. And so once inside, the attackers can fully operate on the system with minimal detection. And if you've been following along with kind of the mindset of Chinese threat actors, that's their specialty, is getting in and then staying undetected for a fairly long time. And, a bunch of different security researchers have done some analysis. And one of the things is that the search engines themselves are so rammed full of advertisements, and you're already pushing out a lot of Trojanized versions of Notepad++ that a lot of users are unwittingly running these already inside of their networks. So, one of the things that is kind of crazy is if you're not running an ad blocker. If you are not at an enterprise level, I would suggest that this is something you highly look at, because I actually was talking to a friend of mine recently, and I sent her a link to download a tool for, just doing something on her computer, and she clicked on the advertisement of the link that I sent to her, and it redirected it to some sort of PC optimization tool. Yeah. And that's what she downloaded. And I was walking through the menus of what I expected the tool to do. And she's like, no, it's asking me to optimize my PC or something. And I'm like, wait a minute. What did you download here? She's like, the link that you sent me. And, I guess I take it for granted because I've been using an ad blocker for I don't even know, 15 plus years or something. But there are people out there who are not using them, and enterprises. And I remember when I was managing browsers, this was something that we pushed out enterprise-wide. We pushed out uBlock Origin enterprise-wide as an ad blocker. And of course, it can cause some issues with, I guess, some websites, but, you take those day by day, right? Or case by case.
Andy, last week on the show, we talked about possibly the value of phishing simulations diminishing in value because it's so difficult to determine a legitimate message from an illegitimate one. And our conversation was around how you need to build an architecture that is resilient and resistant so that even if users do hand over their credentials, it's still very difficult to compromise. I recently was trying to download some software, some well-known applications that are not used for many years on Windows. And I was doing kind of what you're talking about, do a search engine search for that app, try to find the most legitimate looking site, go to that site, like a well-known download hosting site. And it is, for me, like a veteran of the internet, practically impossible on some of these sites to determine like where do the ads end and where is the legitimate download link. It's mind-boggling. If there's one thing it made me say was Steve Jobs was right about the benefit of having a curated, safe app store is so valuable, because the enshittification that Cory Doctorow and Paul Thurrott and everyone talks about has hit download sites incredibly hard. I mean, let's be honest, it's not like CNET's download.com was ever this shining beacon of beautiful web design and easy to navigate. It's always been an ad ridden, I'll avoid saying a bad word here, but you get the point. It's borderline unusable. And so thinking about Notepad++ or 7-Zip or so many of these different applications, Transmission, uTorrent, it's so difficult to find the legitimate link anymore. So, I mean, for the poor user who was trying to click and download the file you had sent her and inadvertently clicked an advertisement instead, kind of goes back to that same point around phishing simulations, where you need to design architecture that's resilient to it. With how bad these ads are today, it's same thing. You need to have an ad blocker in place so that users can actually find the content from the ads. Now, in this scenario, I use an ad blocker as well. This system did not have an ad blocker installed on it. And I won't get into details, it doesn't matter, but point stands on that's how you as an enterprise can help deliver that user experience that's manageable through technology, because user education alone is not going to get you there. Because I'm like, seriously, guys, it is crazy. I was shocked at how, I don't know if I actually started reading the source code to the site to try to figure out, like, is this a legitimate link or what's going on?
Yeah.
But it was really difficult. It was crazy.
Yeah. And what makes it even worse is that there's a bunch of like malicious Notepad++ extensions as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so the browser extensions, again, should be controlled via like an enterprise browser. And we've talked about this. You can do that through Intune. You can do that through GPO. And what I would do is have an allow list, right? Like an implicit block, explicit allow, so that you have, these are the ones that we allow only, and that you push them out. Users should not be able to install their own extensions. If you're allowing that, that's just a world of hurt. And I've been dealing with this for over a decade. When I worked at Trek Bikes, it was actually kind of funny because around the time of July, when the Tour de France was going on, obviously everyone wants to stream it. And so our bandwidth gets eaten up by that. And then also the Tour de France is not broadcasted on a lot of channels, especially real time. And so a lot of people had to get VPN in order to geolocate themselves in France in order to get that. And so we dealt with a lot of this like weird security issues that were very unique to that company, right? Like bandwidth issues around July.
That's
and then
funny.
people were installing these, I don't know if you remember Ola VPN. It was like a
Sounds
free
familiar.
free VPN extension. People would download it, but it was malware. You had to like give over like all of your information, and it was like siphoning, all your DNS requests and everything, right? Something's never free, right? Anything that's free is never free.
Net zero back in the
Yeah.
day.
So yeah, I mean, this is something that if you haven't been doing it, you definitely need to. So anyways, going back to Notepad++, just make sure that you have the most up-to-date. They did fix the whole issue. And so the latest update is going to be the best one. The older ones kind of in between, especially around like September, October timeframe, they actually rolled back into like different vulnerable versions with bugs that were fixed, update to the latest one, and you should be okay. And, Adam, I know you have some thoughts about this, but basically part of the issue is Notepad++ is a widely used application. A lot of people use it and it's open source, but the funding for it is dwarfed by the dependence of it in a lot of places. And so that weakness was really what made this compromise kind of last this long. And it could have been easily caught and fixed if they had the funding for open source. So it's kind of like, that open source is great, except that there's just one person or two people maintaining the source code and don't have time to really review it.
Yeah, it goes back to that XKCD comic about the whole internet being built on this one dependency that's managed by one person in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah.
And here's another example of every single golden image at every single enterprise for a period of time had Notepad++ pre-installed. It was pre-installed on every server, every workstation, very broadly used. And our very first guest on the show ever, Tanya Jenka, the patron saint of AppSec, she talked about how open source is not inherently more secure just by virtue of being open. Security researchers aren't out crawling through open source code repositories out of the goodness of their hearts and doing really hardcore red teaming or ethical hacking on them. And there's a perception that they are, that just by virtue of magically being open source, there's magical security fairies that come around and just go visit GitHub libraries for no good reason. And that's not reality. So open source can be secure, can be great code, but it is not inherently more secure, despite a widespread perception that it is. That is demonstrably false. And so these will continue to happen and is going to be something we need to consider as part of our risk profiles going forward. Is what is our exposure to open source and how are we mitigating that risk?
I think some of the best open source projects have paid versions to them, like for support. So a couple that come to mind, like Bitwarden, right? That's a password manager that is actually open source, and you can get a free version of it. But then they have a enterprise version, they have a paid, family version, and they have third-party reviews of that code. Signal is open source too, I believe, and so that protocol has been reviewed over time. Other ones like Nomad, No More AD, that is now owned by Jamf. That's like an identity solution that is open source, but then they market it with a paid version called Jamf Connect. And so, there's plenty of like very secure projects, but they all require funding. And so, like, without funding, without a means to pay for it, everyone wants everything to be free, but if you don't pay for it, you're not going to get the level of support and security that you want, right? So and it's funny, like, I haven't used I re-imaged this and built this computer just a year or two ago, and I never installed Notepad++ because the version that's come with Windows, Notepad, has evolved over time and become enough that I don't
Much
really
to Mary Jo Foley's chagrin.
that I don't
If you
really
ever have listened to Windows Weekly podcast over on the Twit network, Mary Jo Foley, former host, co-host of that show, famously did not want them to make any changes to Notepad. Just leave it the way it is. And our employer, Microsoft, we do this show outside of work on our own time and self-fund the show. Microsoft has no editorial control over the show, and the opinions expressed are Adam and Andy's. Has done, I think, I agree with you, great work on the built-in Notepad in Windows. It has tabs, it has auto-saving. I mean, there might even be a Copilot function in there. I'm not even sure. It's certainly not in your face, though. For anybody who cringes and like, don't you dare say Copilot, like, you can use it and it is perfectly fine and you do not have to engage with it. I personally have not. I didn't even know it was there, but I do love that I close it and I open it and all my tabs are there and all my content's auto-saved. It's brilliant. It's come a long way and does a really nice job.
I use it in the exact same way that I had used Notepad++ as a text editor. Like, there is Copilot, but I don't really use Copilot. And funny enough, there's actually was a CVE with remote code execution vulnerability for Notepad, which was actually fixed in the February Windows security update. So it is fixed. I went and like checked my version of Windows because I had just recently updated and rebooted my machine and all that. And so mine is updated to the new one. But the CVE, I read through the CVE and it was with what was it called, Markdown, a Markdown file. And if it had a URL, like someone sent you a Markdown file with a clickable URL that they, so it was, I don't know if you'd consider that I guess you can consider it a CVE within Notepad, but they fixed the function. And I was like, I didn't even know, because I copy URLs into Notepad all the time, but you have to like actually scope it as a hyperlink in order for it to be clickable. And so like it's
Right.
not automatic, right?
You have to be in the rich text mode too. If you're in plain text mode, obviously it's unsupported.
Correct. So
And I often use it for text sanitization, where
Yep,
I want it all in plain text. And when I want to strip all the
exactly.
formatting, I drop it in Notepad first and then pull it back out. It's,
By
a
default,
hacky way to sanitize text, but it works
yep.
every time.
Yep, by default, it is plain text the most of the time, unless you like have it in Markdown for some reason. But yeah, so it wasn't something that I was aware of. I read through the CVE before the show, and I was like, okay, well, this is interesting, but it's not the way that I use Notepad and how I think like the majority of people use Notepad. But they did fix it, and so with the latest Windows update, you get the latest Notepad. So
And the updates this month were a hot patch release, by the way. If you're using Windows Hot Patch as part of Windows Auto Patch, no reboots this month. You only reboot once a quarter. So you do reboot in what, January, April, July, and October. So I noticed I went to check for updates on Patch Tuesday and I got a little banner in my Windows Update that said, your PC's already been updated with no reboot required. I was like, oh, cool. Hot patch. Love it.
yeah. Okay, so moving on to our next story, and this is again kind of another application that a lot of people download and use on new computers. So it's 7-zip. So anyone who's built
I
computers,
brought that up earlier. I was talking about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Just if you've been around computers with Windows, the archiving tool Zip has been around for a long time. It's something that I used to download all the time and put on new builds. And funny enough, again, I don't have it on this PC because unzipping zip files has been fine using just the built-in Windows archive tool. And I haven't had to like zip anything specific to a file in a long time. So,
Yeah, Windows has built-in support actually for the 7-zip format even too. So you don't even
mhm,
need to install this to extract a 7-zip archive. Only really if you want to create new 7-zip archives and you want to use like the very high level of compression would you need to install the tool. But otherwise, yeah, the built-in tools are probably sufficient. Or if you're doing like some sort of bulk actions, most likely you're doing something with emulation. If you're doing a bunch of 7-zip stuff, that would be the most common scenario.
yeah. So what happened was the 7-zip app was using someone had stood up a lookalike domain and was serving up a trojanized version of the installer. So the official URL is 7-zip.org. But the
Mhm.
attackers were using 7zip.com, very similar, like to a regular person it might seem very normal, and they actually delivered a functional copy of 7zip alongside a concealed malware payload. This is a very common attack vector, these lookalike domains. So, like,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
you might get emails from like, Microsoft.com, but they replace the O with like a zero or something like that. Or a lot of attackers still use CO because as you're typing, if you type the domain and you just, you hit enter before you type that happens all the time, actually. And so CO was used by a lot of attackers in a lookalike thing, and you get redirected to a page that looks very similar. But .co is actually the TLD, the top level domain for Colombia. So there's probably a lot of domains that are available through that if people aren't buying their domains, to try to cover these lookalike ones.
So yeah, that's actually a bad example because Microsoft very much does go by all the lookalike domains. And this
Right.
is where, again, an open source project like 7-Zip that, by the way, doesn't have there is no way to give them money short of just donating, but there isn't a paid offering. They would have limited funds to go acquire all the potential lookalike domains versus
Right.
a well-funded company actually can and typically does.
Right. Yeah. So like Microsoft would buy them, but like 7-Zip just has the one, right? And so
I mean, you and I are not going to go buy every Blue Security podcast lookalike domain either. Like, if you go to the wrong
exactly.
one and you get some bad advice, that's on you.
Exactly.
We spend enough doing this show and have never taken ads or anything else. I mean, it truly is labor of love. I mean, I just sent you an Apple Pay, a couple weeks ago for a pretty big chunk of money just for
Yeah.
the Riverside and the domain and the Proton and all the things we use to keep the service running.
Yeah.
It's enough. Seven
The
Zip, same thing. It's a great app.
Yeah, and so the attackers they were really smart in this because they signed the installer with now it's revoked certificate that was issued by Joe Zeal Network Technologies Limited. So it lended some superficial legitimacy to it, right? So it's part of the trusted CAs, probably as part of Windows, and so And this is one of the more concerning aspects of this campaign because it relies on that third party trust. Like we, have trusted CAs built into Windows, and so we depend on those CAs to kind of vet, um, who they're giving out their certificates to sign the code. And there's probably not a ton of vetting process, but at least there should be some, and that's how we kind of offload our trust to these CAs. And then this was initially reported on Reddit by a PC builder who followed a YouTube tutorial on building PCs that referenced the people in the YouTube tutorial referenced, I think maybe inadvertently by error, 7zip.com, which would think that that was probably the domain if you didn't go and double check and like do a search, right? And so they referenced it and then he went and downloaded it, and so attackers can kind of exploit that error, that small error, in an otherwise like a very benign content ecosystem to funnel these victims towards malicious infrastructure at scale. A Microsoft Defender did alert on the system with a detection once the malware started to beacon, so at least there's that. But if you look through the technical details that Malwarebytes did a blog on, which we'll link in the show notes, it installed it in these privileged folders that you know not a lot of people are going to be checking for. So, Adam, you mentioned it, but what I would recommend, and this is kind of the same vein, having that trusted app store software should be controlled in an enterprise environment, right? Like either via Mecum, Intune, Tanium, Patch My PC, whatever tool you use, and you should have like Intune gives you the Intune company portal. Mecum has the distribution center or whatever it's called. I can't remember it off the top of my head now. But it installs an application like a store that you can go and self-service. So users should be able to go to a published vetted catalog that is admin's control, and they should be able to self-service through these pre-vetted software packages and not be able to just install things on their own. And so that's how like I would recommend running things in this day and age, just because like just having unfettered access to install whatever you want is more likely than not going to be a recipe for disaster for most organizations.
And even to take that a step further, you mentioned Patch My PC. There's also the Intune Enterprise App Management component part of Intune Suite coming soon to, if you have E5, you'll get it built in. Helps you deploy software by having it prepackaged effectively, where it's software packaging as a service. And so everything we just talked about, it's not like admins are immune from that. It's not like admins would be completely immune from going to 7zip.com, downloading the Trojans one, building an app catalog entry, and pushing it out to all your endpoints. That's entirely possible. When you would use app packaging as a service, ostensibly they go through an additional step of vetting and dotting I's and crossing T's before they build a package, and would be able to avoid getting fooled by some of those just by virtue of that's all they do, right? For someone, that is their job, is to manage that at scale. And then you also, maybe have an SLA. If they do make a mistake, you have another throat to choke, as opposed to in-house. It's just, well, Bob made a mistake and packaged the wrong 7-zip, and now we have a Trojan on all our PCs. So I kind of noticed early on in my IT career, it was one of those things I looked at people doing at every company. Like, why does every company pay a guy to write packages? Like, someone else just across the street here is doing the same thing. So, and I live in Des Moines, Iowa. There's a lot of financial services companies here. There's a Bob or a Jane and every single one of these companies, and they're all packaging the same software. It's duplicative work. And that's not any of these companies' core competency is not packaging software. Why are they doing that? So I'm very excited about the rise of kind of packaged software as a service model for these management suites, because to me that never made sense on why everyone had to do that themselves. And it was basically because there wasn't a good way to share that work. It was all bespoke to your organization, and everyone kind of saw it as, well, we paid Bob to do the work, so we're not sharing it with somebody else so they can get it for free. And it's not a value add. And especially in this case, with everything we just talked about, having that extra layer of trust and assurance, I think is helpful. So I agree with you. And users should not be able to install software, whatever they want. But I would even argue I'd love to get out of the habit of admins being able to build software packages anytime they want either, and get to the point when you're really, as much as possible, using that from someone else and you're not even doing that work in-house. That adds just another layer of trust to me.
Yeah, and that service that is going to be included with Five customers has come a long way. I remember just a couple years ago when it first was announced, and I was talking with some of the product group folks, and they're like, "Yeah, we only have like 30 apps, at launch, and it's going to be a while." But now there's like over 300 some in the catalog. It's very robust, and so the majority of when you look at applications across the board, what most organizations install, there's obviously a curve of like these are applications that we see most common, and those are all included in the app catalog where you do not have to like package. If you've ever had to package Intune applications using like the Intune Win tool, you'll understand the pain using like the command line installers. All of that's included, like the common command line installers and the packaging. You just click a button and deploy. It's super easy. Yeah, this should be something that organizations should be doing, and of course, like removing admin rights on top of that, right? So, all right, well, this was super interesting to research. Hopefully, you guys got something out of it. That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening. As always, the links to the articles will be in the show notes as well as our information. If you want to reach out to us for content that you want to see or questions about the shows that we have, just email us. Thanks, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.